Now, formally, I can as well say welcome again to the masterclass for the European Innovation Council Accelerator. Now, given that your interests cover from the basic explanations of what the European Innovation Council Accelerator call is about, to the proposal writing and writing winning proposals, it is indeed a challenge even for seniors like myself to try to cover such a wide scope and volume of information, ranging from the informations on how the European funding programs work, why there was a work program developed for European Innovation Council, how Accelerator was developed as a funding scheme, down to the understanding of these key success criteria that we'll cover in the second session, which means essentially what is required within the application form, and short application and a long application. There are these two steps. And then as well, what is required within the evaluation criteria, those which are written and those which are communicated to the evaluators' notes and exchange of their experience on what and how, when they ask for clarifications from program managers or the Innovation Council and so on, what they would receive as instructions on how to approach evaluation. So that gives us essentially two sessions of just stating what is written in the documents. Essentially, we'll be paying attention on those key words within the instructions, within the work program, and within the core documents and evaluation criteria. And then in the third session, we'll move on to a step-by-step guide. Now, what the step-by-step guide means in practice, I've apologized for just a second. I'm back. So what the step-by-step guide means is essentially going through the, I'd say, tips, this is how I call them, on what to write in each one of the proposal sections. Then we'll switch on to something much more dynamic and interesting and open for debate and discussion, which is we'll examine proposals which were successful. We'll mostly focus at the first stage, and then we'll have a deep dive into proposal evaluation, looking at the proposal at the second phase. So I'll simulate the environment for evaluation to provide you an opportunity to think as if you were invited by the executive agency to evaluate proposals, and then to discuss on whether you would support the proposal or not. What would you see as the strong points and weak points within it? My own introduction first. So I have a very good blend in my background for the accelerator proposal writing. which includes on the academic side a Bachelor of Business Administration degree at IFAM Business School in France, and then I've completed Master of Business Administration at Solvay Business Schools at Brussels University. And then I've actually had the exact education about this type of calls at the Harvard Kennedy School of Governance in USA, where I had executive education about leading disruptive changes. And this is the essence of what the accelerator is. I've also had high-level management positions in Brussels-based EU Access company, which was created to enable a faster access of the Eastern European and Western Balkan countries into EU programs, and to accelerate the communication and the exchange of knowledge, and to enable more funding, more impact of the projects and funding. Then I've also shifted after EU Access to being an executive of the Balkan Security Network, which has pretty much done the same, except our focus was more on the civic side of the security projects that the EU had funded. Then I helped create a European Training Academy, now operating in 7 countries, and I helped it expand then Truly Business School, Business Academy, and numerous other businesses through projects. In terms of my former roles, I started in mid-90s as a proposal writer for small grant schemes. Then European Commission started calling me names like a senior expert and team leader and coach and so on. Now I have more than 20 years of experience. I've been also project and program evaluator for a variety of different institutions and operational structures and so on. I worked in more than 15 countries. I've also been in charge to help create innovation ecosystems of different regions like Med countries and Balkans and so on. So detailed list of references and so on is available at my LinkedIn. But I probably have the perfect blend of background and education and roles that I had to address the accelerator call. And I had 6 seals of excellence and the same number of proposals which I had won within this funding scheme. And the accelerator call is actually the most competitive funding scheme that European Commission has, which probably ranks me among the best, well, at least like 3 or 5% of the best proposal writers for this scheme. But then again, it's difficult to try to pass on, to share that knowledge and insights. And I'll do my best to try for you today to gain understanding of what the excellence in accelerator proposal writing means, and also to try as much as it is possible within this time frame for you to develop skills which are necessary to win. Now I'll start as announced with providing this background info about why is EU giving you money for disruptive innovations. So how the EU funding program works. And what you can see on the slide is a triangle between politicians, European Commission, beneficiary. It's a simplified slide explaining how institutions work when they decide to give you funding for some of your proposals. And politicians are there to debate and agree on what they'll cooperate on to achieved jointly, and documents when they reach the agreements or EU strategies and policies. And then, speaking in a very simplified manner, then there are quite a lot of EU institutions, but in a simplified manner, European Commission is actually in charge to implement those objectives which are defined within strategies and policies. So they have essentially two types of instruments of how they can implement those objectives. One set of instruments is obligatory. So those are regulations. And if you want to trade on EU market and so on, like you would need to have CE marking and so on and so on. This type of regulation is obligatory as conditional for you to participate in EU markets and so on. While the other set of instruments are EU funding programs. They are not obligatory. European Commission essentially creates a funding scheme, an instrument to cover certain policy areas, and then enables large sums of money for you to apply to essentially implement policy objectives. Now, that's very important to understand because it gives a different perspective on what the EU funding scheme serve and why the EU would give you money for your innovation, while most of the companies, most of my clients who I worked with would assume that their business interests, organizational development, even philanthropic or social impact will be something relevant for the Commission. I must caution you to be very strict about shifting the perspective to observing the proposals from the policy officers and evaluators' viewpoint, which is whether they are contributing to achieve EU policy objectives, which are stated and written and defined within the policy and strategy documents and work programs, which I'm going to now in a few next slides discuss and explain about the European Innovation Council work program and the core requirements for the accelerator. So it's a kind of a shift of perspective which I would want you to have on why would EU give you funding for the accelerator, for any funding scheme. Now, the same that I've had tried to simplify and explain in this previous slide is shown on this next slide, only copy-pasted from the relevant documents. So it literally states that once every 7 years, European Union decides on its funding in terms of the long-term budget, and the EU budget is called the multi-annual financial framework. Now we are within this cycle between 2021 and 2027 of MFF, and then the EU's overall political goals are developed collectively by the institutions. Now in the triangle, it was simplified and it stated as politicians decide about these goals. And typically they wouldn't represent only the citizens that had voted for them. Typically they will represent those who had financed them, and that would usually be the large industry, big money. And then the EU spends money, public money, its budget, to undertake projects for the benefit of EU, which means for the objectives decided and stated within the policies and strategies. And there's quite a number of EU funding programs. So navigating between them is actually now a challenge and, well, actually a business opportunity, because in Brussels, where I spent most of my professional career, we have, I think, that I've seen some research showing that more than 300,000 people live actually from helping others to understand EU funding schemes and help them navigating and how to get the EU funding. So this is a breakdown of the MFF, and I won't spend time to explain it. You can just see the headings on single market, innovation, digital, then cohesion, resilience, and values, and so on. But what's important to state is that this is the first time in the history of EU for this multi-annual financial framework that the EU actually had lended, it borrowed money, and it took almost a third of its budget, which is this huge sum. We never had in the history of the EU such a huge sum, but the EU had borrowed money initially with the intent to recover from COVID and migration crisis and so on and so on. But then the crisis piled up. So we had this ongoing energy and migration crisis and so on and so on. So, but how that actually correlates with funding schemes, it means that you'll have less of a budgetary support for grants and more for investments, or some sort of borrowing which would require from those who had received funds to return what they received. Now, overview of all the instruments is presented here in this slide. It's not designed to scare you. Most of the slides are copy pastes from the official documents, and I'll always try to simplify what's shown on the slides, but they are there because if you want to revisit the presentation and find relevant information, I'll share the presentation that will have pretty much all the answers you need within it as sort of a step-by-step guidebook or instruction manual on how to write winning proposals. So this is the overview of all instruments, and they're divided here into 3 groups based on who decides who gets the money. So we have structural cohesion and investment funds, which is the first group on the left, and those are operated by the national governments of the EU member states and regional agencies or related similar agencies. Now, that's the largest chunk, the largest part of the budget. Then you have community action programs, and this is where Horizon Europe fits. And part of the Horizon Europe is European Innovation Council scheme. So community action programs are operated by the European Commission in Brussels. And under the European Commission in Brussels, you find increasing number of agencies now being created pretty much to employ and fund all the bureaucrats. But supposedly this huge increase of the number of agencies and huge increase in number of employees is there to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, impact of EU funding schemes. Now, I haven't found proof for that yet after 20 more years of working with the EU. However, the formal explanation why we have this increased number of agencies is there. Now, this is where Horizon Europe fits. So we have Research Executive Agency, we have European Innovation Council, we have now EU Fund, we have this group of agencies related to how we operate European Innovation Council and Accelerator Call and Financing. And that is where you'll find the opportunity for gaining more information directly from the officials, through meetings, through brokerage days, info days. Some of the info days for the work program 2025 are already available online. So that's where you get the kind of first-hand info from the officials operating the program. And now we are since the European Innovation Council Accelerator scheme first appeared, that was, if I remember correctly, it was in 2013 or 2012, when the debate started about creating the SME instrument. That was the first time when the European Union had designed, under these community action programs, a funding scheme that will tackle directly the needs of SMEs. Now, prior to that, we had SMEs being a part of collaborative research and technological development and innovation projects. But this was the first time in 2013 when SMEs could independently, solely, one startup and SME could solely apply for a large funding for its disruptive innovation. And since then, we had adjustments, which from my point of view, were actually not contributing to the quality of this funding scheme. It became the most popular and the most competitive funding scheme on the planet. But since then, we had these three major changes as the funding cycles went on, and the changes were pretty much including that big tech and industry is more and more involved into deciding on who gets the money. Now, when you look at the logic, if you come back to the politicians, European Commission, and us as beneficiaries in the third part of the triangle, and look at the logic of the funding scheme, to whom we are submitting applications for the accelerator for disruptive changes, we are submitting it to the European Commission. Now, behind the European Commission, starting from the very design of the funding scheme, is who? Now, on the slide, it says it's politicians, but behind them, you'd see the relevant institutions and bodies, influence groups. And when you look at who's funding the politician and who created the funding scheme, you'd find the big tech, big pretty much, not only big tech, but big money industry. So the very important thing to understand while you're looking at this funding scheme is you're submitting your application on how you're going to disrupt markets, and I'll explain what it means in more depth, but how they're going to create a big change in the market in terms of the value chains, who profits, who's benefiting, who's losing. You're submitting that application to those who are currently controlling the market. You're essentially saying to them, now this is how we're going to actually redistribute your profits so that we get more and you get less. There's a very important point to take into account when you think about designing these proposals. And I'll explain later on how it reflects on your strategy and what you're supposed to be writing in a proposal. But that's why it's important for you to just understand the main funding instruments, how they work. Now, I won't spend time on the external action programs because they are not relevant. Well, they might be, because under Horizon, there is a widening scheme. Now, widening work program is also covering external aid countries and third countries. I think Greece is also listed as one of the widening countries, meaning that the quality of science innovation is not there at the EU average, is below. So you have, under the widening scheme, also European Innovation Council Accelerator kind of prep with, and it's for TRL 4 and 5, and with a little bit less of a grant money available for kind of preparing you to go to apply for the accelerator. So this might be relevant, but it's still under Horizon Europe, and under external cooperation programs you find this group. I won't explain them. Now this is the list just typed and more precisely and kind of with more detail than on the graph, previous graph. But essentially it's the same information just presented in a different format. Now for each one of these funding programs, you have a guide that was created to avoid misinterpretations, misuses. We have incredible number of consultants working supposedly to advance the quality of proposals, advance the impact of funding, and so on. But it's also the widespread, it's wide field for manipulations in terms of the information and misrepresenting results and quality and so on and so on. So this guide was created to assist those who are professionals in this field, and you can download it from the provided links here, and it provides explanations about each one of those programs that I've mentioned, and tips for what's relevant for good applications and how complex the funding schemes are, and do's and don'ts, and budgets, and typical grant size, and so on. Now, from this wide explanation, the cornerstone essentially of how EU funding works, I'm going to narrow down to now Horizon Europe and European Innovation Council and the Accelerator Call. I'm going to narrow down explanation of what's required, and here you can see an overview of how Horizon Europe is structured, how it works, and you have 3 pillars. The first one is devoted to excellent science and aimed to advance the quality of the research work of participating countries in Horizon Europe. Now, those are not only the member states, as I mentioned. There are those who just pay the fee and take part in Horizon Europe. So the first pillar has ERC, European Research Council, has a work program with calls pretty much targeting the researchers and enabling funding for them to advance the basic, mostly the basic research. Then Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, or they're known as people actions, mobility of researchers and innovators now as well. And research infrastructures, and when I say research infrastructures, typically companies would think about, oh, we can get some equipment and so on. And the perspective is different. It's actually research infrastructures on EU level that enable EU to be more competitive. So it's not what companies would need, it's more of the ecosystem, what it would need. Then you have the pillar 2, which is tackling global challenges, societal challenges, industrial competitiveness. And you have these sub-programs. Now, in total, there's, I think, 12 or so on of main work programs and plus 3 or 4 additional ones. So they're covering health, culture, creativity and inclusive society, civil security, digital industry and space, climate, energy, mobility, food, bioeconomy, agriculture, environment, and joint research center. They're relevant for the accelerator as you need to think in a frame of this arena, EU funding arena or horizon, on how does your proposal correlates with the other ongoing projects and objectives. So you need to address the issues, and typically you'd actually see this in the work program, that those policy objectives which are listed in different policy sectors areas are directly presented and then sort of targeted in terms of how to achieve these policy objectives through these work programs. And then you need to contribute to these specific policy objectives within your own application. If you're going for Accelerator Open, still it's bottom-up scheme. Those are all top-down schemes, meaning there is a goal and there is a policy objective presented as a challenge, and your proposal needs to respond to this challenge. So it's what we call top-down, and in Accelerator, it's particularly, I mean, only open. You propose your own solution on how to create disruptive change and scale up, but you still need to provide proof on how you're going to achieve and advance the policy objectives. So, and they are here. So this is why it's relevant to know that these challenges are presented within the other work programs, and you need to be aware of them if your proposal is covering the health or culture or creativity or digital or food or agriculture, whatever. You need to be aware of what are the challenges within the Horizon Europe calls, other calls. And it's very useful for you to correlate your proposal and say, we are also, apart from addressing the priorities of the work program for the accelerator, we are also addressing those other policy objectives listed in the other work programs. And the pillar 3 is here. So this is where the European Innovation Council is. It's under Innovative Europe. And within this pillar, you have these combined work programs. So European Innovation Council is tightly correlated with innovation ecosystems and Institute of Innovation and Technology work program. Now, below what you see as a sort of cross-cutting one is widening work program, widening participation and strengthening the European research area. And I mentioned that because it's targeting those countries, we call them widening countries, which are not at the level of competitiveness in the research and innovation and so on as others, though the leading ones. So it enables instruments, how we're going to strengthen the quality of their research and innovation and so on. 3 main design logics, methodologies for project proposal writing, or I would rather phrase it as project design. The first one is log frame. It's widely used in the external aid programs, the 3rd pillar of the EU programs. And it's the core of international aid, USAID, for example, and so on. So this methodology addresses there is a message. Okay, someone is, you have reached the recording limit. I'm not sure what it means, but
I am here. So it was my AI note taker about the basics.
Okay.
Okay.
Just
Can I open the camera or not?
of course,
Oh,
please do.
please.
So the first approach to project design is called log frame or intervention logic. In the slang that we use, it's either log frame or intervention logic, and in an essence, how do you approach project design following the instructions for this one is you start by doing analysis of stakeholders. Typically, it's possible to start project design with analysis of stakeholders because these interventions are targeting either a specific country or region. So it's not unreasonable to start with analyzing organizations who might be impacted with your proposal, with your project, who have interest, power, and typically what we analyze as well is attitude towards your project's objectives. And then you start analyzing key stakeholders on those bases, power, influence, and attitude, and then you find the most relevant one. Then you, through discussion with them typically, and as well, analyzing the statics, the documentary framework, you find what the major problems are. Now, speaking using terminology of project design, how we present those problems is through a problem tree. So, because it provides you a frame to correlate those problems and identify the crucial ones and so on. And then while you speak with, ideally, through this both-way communication with stakeholders, you create a list of those problems. Typically, those would be like lack of capacity, skills, teamwork, networks, whatever else. And then you, looking at the objective tree, you sort of like in a mirror create solutions for each one of those problems. And you then, we call it a reflection of the problem tree is the objectives tree. And then we ask ourselves the key question, which is, given the funding that EU is offering and time frame, and those stakeholders, people, skill sets, knowledge, networks that we have, what can we do? What's the best thing to do? The most impactful thing to do, which is essentially this strategy question. So if you follow these 4 steps, that's how you create a high quality proposal for the first logic. It's also relevant for other funding project design logics, but typically for the research, the second project design methodology here, typically for the research innovation actions, like research in terms of basic research from technology readiness level and business readiness level. When you start with an idea, and then you develop it and you test it in a lab or relevant environment, and then you go further towards the market, and then you go to mass scale commercialization. So that's a span. So when you start with the research on EU level, which is for that middle section of EU funding programs, when you say research in an area of agriculture or health or ICT, it's too wide for you to start with stakeholder analysis. It doesn't mean that we're not going to do it. We will, but we'll do it through the project as probably one of the first tasks, first steps within the project. But we analyze what we can to begin with, relevant problems. So the research innovation action And CSA, those are coordination and support. They are mostly targeting cooperation, to develop cooperation between the ongoing initiatives and channel them into synergy and maybe develop standardization. So they are mostly involving activities like conferences, transfer of knowledge, and exchange of knowledge, and so on and so on. While in the research and innovation action, you have usually a work package that starts with basic research. Now that means obtaining a new knowledge. And then after you had sort of gathered all the data and analyzed it, then you try to validate it and test it and see how it works. And then you have a work package there for aiming at that part. And then you would have sort of, you step into innovation action, essentially, getting closer to the market at the TRL 4 and 5. And this is where you test and validate or demonstrate it. And this is where RIA ends. But innovation action does not have the research, basic research, so getting the fundamental knowledge. It starts usually with the TRL 3 or 4, and then steps more into the market, into commercialization. So those are usually innovation actions, usually have larger budgets. And then I explain CSA. So when you're approaching the design of these projects, you start usually with analyzing what we call state of the art, which means where are we at this moment in terms of the excellence in that area, and how can we, in terms of and that's usually the first part of the proposal, it's called excellence. How can we go beyond the state of the art in the specific sections? So it requires from you to do a little bit of research in terms of scientific publications, or the levels of, in terms of technological development, what we've achieved in the specific area, and then analysis on how you can, through these are mostly top-down challenges, top-down calls, how can we move this state-of-the-art closer towards those objectives which the EU had stated in the call text. And the third, this is unique approach for the EU funding arena. This is why I say my background was pretty much, it was fortunate that I had that background for this type of a call, because this is as much as I'm aware of, and I've been working with the Commission for more than 20 years, 25. And now, this is essentially the only scheme where you, essentially what you do is you develop a business plan. But versus the US investment schemes, which are solely based on business plan, you have quite a lot of bureaucrats to feed in EU. So there's a lot of EU bureaucracy involved in trying to connect your business plan. So trying to have your disruptive innovation on some markets correlated with the policy objectives and correlated with the EU added value and how EU is going to benefit in terms of creating new markets, employment, societal benefits, and so on and so on. And this is where you'd find the struggle for the business-minded people who are skillful in designing business plans. Why they typically fail in this accelerator arena is because they're not taking into account the logic that I presented to you in the first slide when I started, politicians, Commission, and us. So you're submitting your proposal essentially to the policy officers. And they are, apart from, and you'll see that in the evaluation criteria in the next session, apart from assessing on the profitability, which is the essence of a business plan and sustainability, if you're going to not only try to create a rapidly kind of wealth on a business niche or controlling the market segment and so on and so on, which are the only profitable strategies for achieving this fast growth, which is required under disruptive innovation scheme, under accelerator scheme. So you want your European Commission, as they claim, they want to fund unicorns, those who will have very rapid high growth. Now, how can you, the only way for you to have a high growth means that you're going to have a control of a market niche and achieve high profits. You can't have an incremental growth. You can't beat competition by small technological advancement and small different in price and expect to have a high profits and high growth. You can only create a market niche and seize the control of it, and then have the premium prices for a while. This is how you... Yes?
And I think that the core problem is a lot of startups didn't solve the core problem sometimes, because I attend a lot to acceleration projects. The main reason of not building a very good business plan is that a lot of startups, they didn't solve the core problem. They didn't meet the problem owner. I think
it's a good point in terms of defining on usually when you approach the proposal writing, usually besides the company description and so on, what we tackle is the description of problem. Now, whose problem it is, and then we start with explaining the solution. So you're right, because when you look at the design of whose problem are we solving, and that's going to be on one of the next slides, it's not a segment of a market. It needs to be what we call thinking big and shooting over the fence. It needs to be something that's going to change the market, meaning changing the industry, meaning shifting the state of the art. So it's at that level, which is usually very much wider than looking at the specific needs of a niche, of a group that might be helped to, for example, automatization of some process, or some smaller level of innovation, which, looking at different segments of the market, might even exist already somewhere. So I'm going to come back to that. But this approach of designing a business plan and complication that we have, that this business plan essentially needs to address EU policy objectives, creates this huge challenge for the proposal designers for the accelerator, because it's contradictory to the typical business plan design focused on achieving high profits, to try to include in achieving high profits the EU added value. It's very challenging to get there. That's important. Now, I'll explain strategies on how we actually do it, but this is now presenting what's required. And exactly to address what you just stated, this slide explains it. So when we look at innovations, when you say those who had been writing proposals are not addressing initial problems good. Now, the first level of innovation this is where most of the proposals fail, because the first level of innovation is usually maximizing the cost effectiveness of core business, and that means cutting expenses, and that means implementing new technologies or ways of working that will increase essentially efficiency, productiveness, and so on. And this is where people in contact with their clients, they say, oh, we'll optimize your accounting, we'll create it like automatic payrolls, and we'll do this and we'll do that and so on. And then you think, well, yes, okay, so one segment of my clients is struggling to meet that, and they're hiring, for example, private accountant. If they're small and medium enterprises, one man who's probably doing it through a software package. If it's a large industry, then they probably already have SAP or something. And then you look somewhere in between on how many possible users I might have, and you're looking at the essentially advancing the profitability and way of working of a business. And that's, I would say, horizon one. And we're not looking at those type of innovations when we are trying to fund accelerator proposals, because they're not at the horizon that and in terms of their impact, they're not there. It's not the level that we're looking at. The second level of innovation is a level of when we try to use existing expertise and resources, skill sets, infrastructure that we have for the things that we had not been covering before. Now, I can create an exact two ways. I can give you two examples of what's meant by that. During Corona, there's a small scale example in an SME. I met a person in while I was going to coast area in Montenegro. There was a driver driving a van, and we started chatting, and he said, through this chat, this was not my core business. I was an owner of disco club and pubs and cafes, but due to Corona, I had lack of guests and profits and income, but I had my vans. I had two vans. And most of the neighbors were asking me when I would go to nearby, well, actually the capital, it's not nearby city, but it's something like 100 kilometers away. But he said most of the neighbors would ask me to bring them something, to buy something and then deliver, because I had a van and they didn't. And then I figure out that I actually discovered a new niche. I had resources, I had regular kind of routes, supply routes, and so on. And there were clients, and they even addressed me. It's not that I sort of did marketing to advertise these services. And there I was. I started a new line of business, which was essentially the delivery, supply for that region. And then I asked him, like, and what about the north parts of the country and the other segment? What do you think about expanding? I said, and that showed that he had a clever, he was not school, kind of educated in business school, but just logical intelligence. He said, well, I'm not going to expand to the north and so on until I have a client base. Because from there, I'm not getting demands for services yet. So I'm going to try to kind of probe a little bit and see whether I'm going to expand further. Now, on a larger scale, I'm going to use a different example. For example, Disney, while going into China, they figure out that they can't control intellectual property. They can to a certain extent, but it's very limited. And all sorts of replicas were kind of flourishing, and they were figuring out, okay, so now we have this brand, we have these characters, so, and we have kids and different target groups which are pretty much kind of accustomed and like them and use them and toys and like watching movies and so on. But we're not profiting from it. We're not earning anything out of it. What do we do? So that the group was thinking about, so how do we use these resources and start profiting from them? So they started, Chinese market is big on learning English. And then they started developing business model where all those character movies and so on slightly shifted for the Chinese market into language learning, English learning. So they became the most popular tool for learning English, which was then paid. So it was a revenue model. That's the second kind of horizon of innovation. It's good. It's good. You do need to have a certain higher level of innovation than the first horizon. But again, it's not what we're looking at on the accelerator. Our accelerator, we're on the third horizon, which is solving big problems. And this is what I say, thinking big, shooting over the fence. It means looking at the whole market as it is and thinking, okay, so what is going to disrupt the existing value chains in the market? Now, what that means is for the big businesses who are currently dominating and having the largest market shares, after our intervention is going to change. The situation will be different. So those who had like 30%, 40, 50, 60, or so on, and this mixture of those who are controlling the market now is going to look differently. And we are going to get, at least, if we're going to be a unicorn, we are thinking, depending on the market, if it's a construction market in the EU, it's really huge. If it's nuclear, it's not that huge. You don't have so many nuclear companies, and so on and so. But depending on the market, what we're thinking of here is we're thinking of controlling, let's say, 15% of the market share would be something to have in mind as kind of good beginning, as promising that you can have a significant impact on the market. So that's like a minimum. And what we are also considering is that it says here, one of the 10 would be a success story. So what that means is essentially we're accounting, we believe that like 90 or more, 95%, and this is the exact percentage success rate, will fail. So those who are trying to do, they will fail either through, of course, in the commission setup, they failed through evaluation and proposal evaluation, and then the success rates are in the first stage when you submit a proposal, the short version, something like, I think 6 or 7% had passed the first stage in 2024. Not sure it was 24 or 23rd, what I'm quoting, but pretty much that's the success rate for the first stage. And then you have a bit higher success rate for the phase 2, which was 20 to 30%. And then you have a drop for the third one in the jury, which was around 17. So essentially, it's lower success rate than 95% of those who's failing. It's like 99% are failing. So that 1% gets the money. So that's the horizon of innovation that we're looking at. We're looking at disruptive innovations that will change the situation on the market. And when I say change the situation in the market, essentially it means who controls those big market shares. Now, ideally, what you want to present to the commission, because who is going to be observing those pitches that you deliver there, and who's going to be influencing the proposal evaluation? Well, exactly the same people to whom you're going to you're pitching to, those who control the market now. And it's not that the CEO of those companies will sit in the evaluation committee, but some of their employees or people who had been very much influenced by them. So they were either working in their research centers, they were managers, they were strongly influenced, financed, and their mindsets would typically reflect the ethics and the mindsets of the leaders of the companies, of those who are dominating the market. So if you're going into health and you're pitching to Novartis director, and you're saying to them, we're going to take away your leadership in those and those and those segments of the market, and by developing these new drugs or whatever, we're actually going to take away your profits. So what I'm saying is they won't like it. And the solution that the commission had found and proposed through the proposal application form and through the evaluation form is creation of new markets. That's how they call it. So they say, okay, so we're not going to take all of your market share. So you'll keep your old market share, but we are going to actually develop a new market where we will have 30, 55% and so on. And strategically looking at how do you actually get, because being small and growing up to become a unicorn, it does not happen. I had never seen it in my lifetime, and not only professional career, without the support of the big ones. You can't go from being a small one man, 1 to 10, or less than 30, or even let's get to, I don't know, 250, which was the definition, and then get to booming growth or becoming millionaires and controlling 30, 40% of the market, unless you have a support of the big ones. And this is essentially the strategy what I'm here pitching to you. And the only winning strategy is to team up with the big ones. Now, how? Because what you're pitching in your proposal is that you're going to take away the profits. So it's either that within those who are controlling the current market, you find those who'd like to grow in their market shares, to take the leading ones, to take over the lead. So you're pitching to them and trying to team up with them and create a new value chain based on your kind of tying up. Like I found it a bit funny, but that's essentially the link between OpenAI, ChatGPT, and Musk. Like, you know, we're pitching to the big one, he's helping, we are growing, and there are the extensions, but we are now becoming the lead and so on. So
Even Quen, the new AI tool from Alibaba.
Exactly. And then, so that's the one way. Or the other way is when you look at the market and who's present there, you try to look at those who have access to your potential customers already. So they have their trust, there's a brand awareness, there's communication, there's kind of cooperation, but they are still not selling to them what you want to sell to them. So you're actually kind of bringing someone who's horizontally already there, like adding a service to DHL or Glow or somewhere who has got a reach, and you add something to them. So that's how you grow. But yet again, it's a partnership between a very small one and a big one. And the risk that you're facing as a small one is being essentially eaten, absorbed, replicated. The greatest risk that I have seen in working with my client is not that those who had high quality ideas, it's not that they didn't get it right. They couldn't balance the relationship with those who had all the power in terms of intellectual property, money, resources, and so on, to keep the balance so they remain partners. I witnessed so many times initiatives where the big ones think we won't depend on those guys, because it's a question of sustainability, reliability. What's going to happen in terms of if we don't fully control them, we're going to probably be risking tremendous amount of profits and market share and so on and so on within our value chain. We want to control it. Now, if we can't control the small ones, we're going to replace them with the same, but under our control. We're going to create the same one. We're going to replicate it, but under our control. So that's what I've seen in most of the cases as a typical first response. And because the Commission had now, well, not now, years ago, introduced this obligatory intellectual property and control and so on, so on, so on, they just kind of wait to see you die naturally. And then after you had failed, because typically what happens is the lack of capacity to follow up, because this rapid growth means also rapid expansion in terms of the number of employees, then training and controlling them, having adequate skill sets, and so on and so on and so on. So there are so many bottlenecks. And if someone want to push the right button to see you kind of not pass a bottleneck, but stay small at some of those points, it's not too difficult unless you have an adequate support structure around you. So that's essentially what happens with many. They stay small or they simply fade away. And then you see that the industry had picked up what they've initially tried to sell and pitch and integrated it in its own services. Now we are at 10:56, which means that we're almost at the end of the first hour, and I'd like to keep the 1 hour sessions for us to have time to relax a bit for a few minutes and so on. So I'll kind of fly through the next few slides, because I don't consider them overly relevant, but I'll only state the most relevant information for you from the work program. Now, there's a link here at the bottom right corner for the official, the presentation of the work program and info day. And so they have better slides and they have better bureaucrats explaining these technical issues. Essentially, these are the 6 key points of what the Accelerator work program is about. So most of it is marketing. I'm kind of sad to say that, but 90% of what the European Commission does is marketing. So most of it is marketing. It's not really helpful to you. It's helpful to the bureaucrats having their jobs. and promoting how good it is what they're doing. So essentially, it's an investor of choice for high potential innovators, which I would say it's really contradicting any business logic that I had ever seen. It's not. You really want to have a clear cut kind of investment, business oriented.
Okay.
You don't want to have that much bureaucracy and so on and so on. But they are selling, like continuously selling the kind of good word about what EU is doing. And okay, because I'm often paid by the EU, so I won't contradict fully, but I'm trying to convey as much as possible the truth to you, so you can be more competitive and have less of those side tracks in thinking and designing interventions. So for visionary startups, entrepreneurs, researchers, and so on, and on their represented groups. Now they say women and less developed ecosystems. So, now that's even funnier because so you want to have a unicorn and you want to compete with the most ruthless sharks in the market, and you're kind of trying to do it from the wheelchair. That's the idea. And
Yes.
that's kind of
exactly this thing.
And then, so it says it's financing the critical gap. That's true, because that's we can't, in terms of fundraising, it's not unattainable for people, the majority that I know, to start a business. You gather fundraising for it, but to finance growth, this is where the rocket, in order to get to the orbit, to the next level of innovation, where we're looking at, you spend the most fuel if you want to create a kind of picture on how much you need to spend. It's like a rocket reaching the orbit. That's how much you spend in those first few hours, in the first 2 years, actually, which Commission gives you. So that's the critical financing gap. And high risk, now we're going to address that. That's true, because you can't not claim to have a high risk when you're talking about competing with the most competitive businesses in the market. It's certainly a high risk, and it has a lot of variables you need to cover. Now they always invent these new buzzwords, like now it's deep tech innovations. Previously, it was it was differently shaped. Essentially, it meant developed through the initial research work, so research based and derived from the research work. But now ensuring societal impact. Strategic autonomy is new, and I think it will have a play in 2025 because of America First, because of war with Ukraine-Russian war and so on. Strategic autonomy and security is now kind of big hype. Now, we want a strategic autonomy, and we want to be competitive. EU wants to be competitive with US, with China, with others, and it's not, essentially. Now, in my experience, most of those who had received funding and had great ideas and so on actually had moved to UK or US because those countries have faster access to funding and better develop the innovation, the investment ecosystems. While EU is trying to do simplification on it, it's still not successful in it. So now commercializing research in terms of market adoption, yes, fast, agile, applicant friendly, not at all. It's not nearly as fast or agile or applicant friendly. It takes, typically you need to think of a month of preparing a short application. Now I can do it in a week, but I've been there for 10 years, and I can do it because I know exactly how the system will evaluate it so I get the highest marks for the first step. Now, in the second step, it's not that easy. In the second step, you need at least 2 months of fully focused work on just writing it, just doing it correctly so that it's good on paper. And then still, it's a part of the work. And my part is writing it to be perfect. But what's happening in reality, I try to, whenever I see flaws in the teams and clients' work, I say we have time now between this short term and submission of the full application for you to fix the flaws before you go to the interview. And typically they don't. Usually they approach it with, when we get the money, we're gonna do perfect stuff. We're gonna do this. And also in the contracts, when they hire the consultant, I'm a consultant. I was also, it depends what kind of a role you have. Like when the commission assigned me, it previously what the agency was called Agency for SMEs, and I had at one point a status to be, which I usually try to refuse and reject, and the status of someone who was called like provider of business advisory service coach for this funding scheme. And you have a very different role. Instead of supporting the company, essentially what you're doing as a coach is controlling whether they are what they claim to be. And after you do that for a few days, you submit a report, and now you have an ethical dilemma on how to present them. My resolution of the situation was usually to present them like they need to improve a little bit, and then you can fund them. But typically what you see is they're not nearly there where they claim to be, unless of course they're a spin-off of a large company or research innovation department of someone, but then they don't need you. They already have the existing, they just are like a cover up for grabbing this resources. So essentially it comes down to this few months of effort. And now those companies, if you're acting as a consultant, the good thing to say to the companies who you're consulting with is, guys, you need to make really to make changes in where you are now and where we will be once we submit the proposal before the interview. You will need to do the work, and it will be a hard one. So it's not just what me writing on a paper making it look good. So and I'll show you examples on where many of them had failed. They're good company, high quality teams, but yet not kind of raising up to the level which is necessary for them to get this kind of funding. I don't know whether you know the compatibility of these instruments. I want to just point out that on technology readiness level, in terms of how you approach funding for different stages of development of your innovation, first you have a pathfinder, and essentially it is for consortiums. That's not nearly as attractive as when you have a team or a company which then can say, okay, so I am in charge of the money that I'm going to get. In this case, there are 3 or 4 more entities, and typically they are research development entities and universities, RDI centers, and so on, that help you shape from TRL 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be pretty much the level where you're aiming at reaching TRL 3 or 4, which would be a validation demonstration, essentially. That you reach the level where you can demonstrate it in a lab, or you can demonstrate it in a relevant environment, for example, but that's it. And it's up to 3 million. And then transition, again, here you have consortiums, but you can go for a single app as a single applicant for a grant up to 2.5 million to validate and demonstrate technology at TRL 3 and 4, aiming to achieve 5 and 6. So that is, you need to assess where your client is and see, okay, so whether you're going for accelerator or you're going for the transition. Now, accelerator is from this year. Previously, it was from the TRL 5. Now, from this year, it's innovation activities TRL 6 to 8. Why? It's because, as I explained to many of my clients, providing proof that you are at TRL 5 is not at all complicated. And because we didn't have transition design as it was before, you either have an option to choose between Pathfinder and Accelerator. And majority of my clients would go immediately for Accelerator, trying to avoid this, for them, inconvenient control of money and intellectual property and benefits, saying, okay, let's jump directly to trying to prove that we have 5. And right now, you find the same mindset, actually, among clients. So the Commission tried to address the problem by adding transition in the format as it is, and also adding the call under the widespread, if you remember the cross-cutting called widening, and under that call you have the same, it's called accelerator widening, and it's almost the same like transition call, but it offers you up to, I think, 0.5 million euros, and you can work also in partnership, and it gets you from TRL 3 to TRL 5 or 6. So it's preparatory grant scheme for preparing you to get to accelerator. And this is new also from 2005. That's for the big ones, essentially. So it's kind of pitching an investment component for those who are requiring between 10 and 30 million. Welcome back. Just a brief test. Can you hear me well? And can you see me?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So we're going to move on to call analysis and understanding key success criteria. And that narrows down to understanding what are the policy objectives, and that was what are the key words from the work program that we've just looked at, and then how essentially how the program works. Then what are the requirements within the application? What are the questions we need to answer? And third is our variables, what are evaluation criteria. So those are the success factors. So let's start with the questions or evaluation of the short application. So this is what we need to cover in the first step, and to address each one of these to get maximum score. So when I say address these questions, evaluation questions, to get a maximum score, what it means is essentially to educate the evaluator in such a way so the evaluator cannot do anything but assign you the maximum score. So that means because of the diversity of the audience that we're addressing as evaluators, that means that we need to sort of break down on what it means, novelty, and break down nature of innovation. What I would do is I would go back to how those words appeared, how that showed up in this work program, what were previous words which were used, and what it really means. Breakthrough nature of innovation. The question is the proposed innovation highly novel? So what's the opposite of it is that is incremental innovation, just a step forward and not the horizon what we're looking at. Is it deep tech? Now, breakthrough, technological breakthrough, scientifically based step forward compared to the existing solution? Does it move the state of the art where we are right now on the markets and in research work? Does it move significantly? Does it promise a significant step further? Or it's something that just might a little bit advance the effectiveness, efficiency, and so on and so on? That's the first question. Now, in order to be convincing for the evaluators that you have addressed properly, you need to be very clear about that you're looking at this third horizon. You're looking in the entire market. You're looking in those market shares which I initially explained. It is rare that evaluators would accept, I had not seen it, that the breakthrough innovation was not a result of the research work. So that means that essentially it comes from, and that would relate to the last criterion here, team. It comes from a period of long period of research, and then you need also to have a convincing story on how you had reached technology readiness level 6. Well, 5, so because you can start, funding from 6. So that's the answer to it. And I'm going to show you examples of how we did it in different proposals in different ways. But essentially, it means that those who say I have a good idea and so on would fail. It means that you had to either work in a team or be in some way correlated with the research institutions. Ideally, you can show that you started with within of some of the innovation hubs or some accelerator hubs or some innovation ecosystems where you had access to mentors, research facilities, and so on and so on. And then you had to test it, and you've been through some trials, and it was tested in a lab. And then you for companies who start without this, you ideally then try to connect them with it, and then you try to provide necessary evidence of technology readiness level 5. So you provide that evidence that they've tested it, validated it at some level of of whether it's a product or service or it's a business model, with some customers who have tested it, tried it, and said, oh yeah, that works well. And then ideally, if it doesn't work well, usually you see that, well, no, we found some mistakes and flaws, and then they were corrected. And that's even more convincing, saying that, okay, so this is how we got to the technology readiness level. Which is clearly second question. Is the sufficient demonstration that innovation has completed all aspects of TRL 5, which means validation in relevant environment for the application of technology. Now, taking in consideration that it might be innovative service, product, business model, whatever. So you need to construct what it means, relevant environment. And as I've stated, If it's a, I don't know, medical solution, it would be a clinical trial, right? And those are strict, very clearly defined. And so now, if it's a service offered by a company, then those would be clients who have provided feedback and so on, and we've adjusted that it works. Timing. So the wording they use here is the innovation at the cutting edge of new market, societal, and technological trends. And they're saying cutting edge, meaning, so is it really the right moment to deploy this? And when I say deploy this, I mean on a mass scale, because what you're doing is you're not testing it at a level of small size market that's TRL 5 or even lower at the laboratory level. Now, whether we have a chance to achieve mass scale commercialization is a question. Whether we can, if you look at the numbers, get to that market share of 15% at some point within the 2 to 3, 5 years. But let's say that within 2 years span, you can't go below 5%, whatever the market is. Ideally, you're pitching minimum 15, but let's say you have a time span of a bit wider. Ideally, you can pitch that you can go for 24 months to 15% market. That's the ideal situation. However, you need to be very convincing, because it's not at all an easy challenge. The numbers are huge. The timing, let me use an example. Can we deploy a large number of something, well, it's not innovative, electric cars at the EU market, and let's assess the infrastructure and what are the mobility is highly competitive, very, very tightly controlled and highly competitive market. But let's ask a very simple question, in this case, timing, like, can we sell a lot of electric cars, provided that we don't have the infrastructure to support it, meaning chargers at adequate range, so that those cars can reach whatever is necessary and expected by the customers and so on, without kind of having to shift their way of life and so on to adapt to take in this new technology. So if we don't have the infrastructure yet developed, we can't sell that much of cars. So whether it's mature for this to be deployed in terms of the environment, says here, cutting edge of a new market, societal and technological trends. And then we take in consideration what else is happening on this market. Now, are the hydrogen cars maybe already better developed? I'm just inventing now the situation. Whether the societal trends are such that people are looking at electric bikes and maybe, I don't know, monowheels or something else as something which is dominating the behavioral patterns and mobility solutions, rather than this. So you take into account of all of that, and then you present that this is the right time. Ideally, my answer to the commission, which was always the winning one, it's a kind of, what I'm explaining is a bit of a, you could say this, a secret of successful proposals, but that's essentially good practice. The only winning practice is what you pitch at is the commission had announced or introduced or already adopted a new regulation, and hence, consequently, the market will need to shift to a new behavioral pattern or new technologies or something else. And hence, you say, Well, there is no better moment than this one, because all the big ones will need to start using this solution, which we had developed. And that's the kind of 100% bullet point that's straight in the target, in the center. Because then no one could claim that it's a false information, because they would say, okay, so the EU policy won't work. And they can't do that. They're employed by the Commission. so that's usually what they need to do. Now, impact, competitiveness, and demand. Is the innovation better than the competition proposes? You don't know what the competition is proposing unless you do the research of ongoing research, technological development, innovation projects, meaning apart from your investigation, analysis of competition on the market, what you also need to demonstrate is you need to search Cordis databases and look at the ongoing and recently finished projects that the Commission had funded. And then include them in your comparison. Usually we do that with creating a table, and we then look at variables that what's relevant for those solutions, and then we create a comparison table why our solution is better compared to everything which was already deployed on the market, or what is planned to be deployed on the market. And then we find something that they had not considered. Now, this process of analysis of what's there in the market and what's been researched, developed, and now there are attempts for it to be deployed, is actually a great process for the company and your client to learn. Now, for example, I'm going to show you that later on. I had a mobility innovator saying, we have developed a electric delivery, essentially like a bike, but it's not a bike. It has 4 wheels, but it's just rather kind of more narrowed down so you can fit to move on a bike tracks. And they've designed it in such a way so that EU would allow, in terms of regulations, for this to move on the bike tracks, so it can avoid usual traffic jams and so on. And we have a delivery system that's now moving faster and cheaper, and ecologically is better, and it's not existing on the market right now, and is going to kind of overtake the, I don't know, Volley, Glovo, whatever else. Perhaps maybe ideally merge and take large parts of business of their markets, and maybe be used by them as well for certain size of packaging and types of deliveries. So that was their claim, and it was a good claim. It was a rather good one. But then I looked at what the Commission is trying to fund, and what they're pitching at in terms of, there's the first set of criteria which I mentioned, the policy objectives. And they were saying, well, it's not that we are lacking delivery electric vehicles or advanced traffic solution using electric vehicles or something like that. What we want to do is we want to see demonstration of models that would extend the range. We want better batteries and better systems logistically in terms of charging, fast charging, and so on and so on. Also, integrated solutions in terms of how do you control these large fleets in terms of the urban mobility, so you avoid traffic jams and you develop. So now this process of developing solutions, now while you're examining what's there on the market and you're examining what's being researched and the attempts to deploy new technologies and so on, new solutions, that's why I say it's a learning process. And that's why my feedback to the client is, you got a good solution and you can commercially earn it right now. And now you're facing choices between, you're either going to try to discuss partnerships with the big ones, going directly to DHL or whoever is in those areas where you have the reach to deliver these vehicles and use them, and start selling and trying to find adequate partnerships with them, renting them these vehicles, doing something, finding a business model of cooperation. Or you're going to integrate into your solution and claim that within the next 2 years, and this is why you need grant, you are going to develop better batteries with a longer range, and you're going to develop also an ICT sort of a network of communication among the fleet, also integrated within maybe Google Maps or some other system for positioning that will enable the fleet to actually act smart in urban mobility. So that you're facing these challenges. You either go this way or that way, but if you go in this first way, which is easier for a business leader, this is where you immediately find obstacles, because you see, they've invested a lot of effort to get there where they are. They've been very brave to assign workers, designers, innovators, people from the company, and spend resources in developing this, what they developed. And once it's here, you have that, ooh, we did it. We are on a verge of new, huge profitability, success, fame, reward which is earned, is expected. And you're delivering them bad news, which is the EU is not really looking for that. So, and but you have demonstrated that you are now in the amazing, great position, provided that you're ready to commit to these 6 to 8 in the policy development areas where the EU wants you to go. You're in a great position to get this grant. And typically you'd find at the top level of management, yes, but let's see how we work around it. Let's not do the work and have that on paper and get the money, and later on we might see it. Market deployment. Does the innovation have the potential to develop new markets or significantly transform existing ones? And this is the question where it was I think provided you the answer to it, where you need to convince the big ones that you found a way to work with some sufficiently reputable partner that cannot be attacked by that 1 or 2 people who had long-term experience in the industry. So big brands, big names. So either the evaluator who had worked for them or some of the competitors can't say, oh no, it's not a high quality, it's not controlling sufficient size of the market share, and so on and so on. Because typically they influence all of those who are present on those markets, they influence the commission, and commission would never go against them. So evaluators are well aware of that. So you need to present that you have some of them in your value chain. Then also, it's very good that you demonstrate that within your value chain you have included regulators, those who provide, you work with the commission, you work with agencies or whoever is covering that area, you work for those who are, if the certification or standardization exists, then you're connected with them. But if it doesn't, then you are going to work with them on creating a new certification standardization scheme for your solution. So you're working with them as well. Then you also need on the market side those who are going to be distributors, advertisers, sellers, customer relationships, and so on. And you'd find that many of the applicants had solved that set of variables because they declared, we're going to do B2B. So we're going to just sell to businesses. And that would tremendously reduce the amount of people and effort and variables necessary for you if you go to B2C, like business to customers. Now, if you're going to get a sky-high growth, that will mean you have tremendous amount of increase in numbers of customers, which again requires support and so on and so on and so on. So in order to cut that set of variables, many of the applicants decided to say, no, we're going to B2C, and someone else is going to go to customers. So that's one of the way how you do it. Better than the competitors' proposals, bringing sufficient added value to trigger demand. Now, triggering demand is not the right thing you want to write, because previously, in previous funding schemes, and you'd find misleading words like this one in the new funding schemes. In the previous funding schemes covering this exact same funding scheme, it was stated you need to provide evidence or significant evidence of existing demand and so on and so on. And here it said that you need to provide essentially that there is an added value which will trigger demand. And if you say that added value will trigger demand, it's guaranteed that you will not get funded. It's 100% misleading, and you're not going to be funded, because what you need to be claiming here is that the demand exists, and we need to find a way to get our solution to the customers. That we already tested, the demand is there. Now, how you prove that? What comes first to your mind if I say provide me the proof of a large demand?
A proof of concept.
You need to be, I'd say, more kind of shock thinking than that. Meaning, what we need, let me come back to the initial point, what we need to do with the evaluators, we need to narrow down any space that they can claim anything but we want. So what is going to narrow down this evaluator response? If you say there is a proof of concept or something, evaluator can say yes, but that is not proof which is undisputable that we have a huge demand. So what is the proof for which evaluator cannot provide a negative answer and dispute it? Is there, if you don't have ideas, I can help you, but I'm just
I think to circle the problems of the big companies that they have about this sector.
Good beginning, think step ahead. Orders from the big companies, meaning you have pre-orders from the big companies already there as an added documents in the proposal. Apart from, I've listened to many replies saying, oh, we have brilliant market research. That's fine. But anyone can, and they're paid to do that. Anyone can say, yes, but it's not a guarantee that you're going to have a huge sales, essentially. We don't, it's fine that we have a lot of risks, yeah? And the risk, essentially, where you want to bring the risk down to is 6 to 8. You don't want to have a risk in terms of demand. You want to have a risk in terms of whether we're going to succeed to advance the innovation to, in this previous case, it was range of the battery. So, but we're quite certain, based on the previous research and the acceleration of the quality of the design and so on, that in the previous years we've managed to do this. So we think that by new circuits, new blah, 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 the range will be done, and that's how we're going to use the grant and so on. But you don't want to have the risk at the level of the demand and guaranteed sales. And the only way for you to have a mass scale commercialization, large scale of demand, or a lot of customers, unless you are already in control of some sort of a distribution system, or whatever it would be on the ICT level, some, I don't know, it would be Google, I don't know, Play, or some for EOS download app, some system of how you're going to deliver, unless you're controlling it. The only reasonable way is that you can prove that you have a large orders already from big companies who either might use it for themselves, integrate them in the sales process, or go to further on to the customers. Let me provide an example of how it works. I had a Slovenian ski company. It was a long time producer. I say a long time. I mean, it's a company that's in the business for like more than 40 years, I think. That's what I want to pitch on. So they're good in terms of quality. Their brand is established and everything, but they wanted to get funds for innovation, and they didn't know how. So, but the government itself, their government, a small country, was devoted on let's find the ways to grab more money, for our companies. And so they said, okay, what can we do innovative in providing these ski equipment? And then somebody thought, well, we're going to add some technological innovations on the bottom side of the skis and snowboards, and you can control for different terrains using your mobile phone whether you want it more rough, to be slower, or to be more flat, or something like that. And when I saw that, because I like skiing and snowboarding, I was passionate in skiing and even more passionate snowboarding. I thought I wouldn't want to have that, actually, because I don't trust it would work. That's the first thing. And what I had seen is the change of the surface of that is I don't know how it's going to affect. When I use my snowboard, I'm already, when I start doing my wild ride, I'm already in my mind thinking I'm going to break this stuff.
Yes.
I'm not thinking I'm going to control how it moves, by using my mobile phone. And then I thought it's not going to. There's no buy-in for this. I'm not as a consultant. I thought you can't convince market that everyone's going to kind of go for it like a new BMW version or something. But then they thought, and we jointly thought, okay, so who are they had a very small market share in terms of overall EU market in selling the equipment. But who are those who have the largest market share? And because they know each other, they're friends for years. They're there in the same conferences throughout decades already. They are having, you know, it's not like animosity. It's actually a friendship, you know, between them. And so the guy who was the owner of the company said, well, let's call this guy who's kind of formally controlling the largest market share. And then we got the proof that their R&D department saying, provided that our research, our 6 to 8 works, at the time it was 5 to 8, they are going to include this solution for everything they produce. And that was already 30% of EU market share. Now, that one letter was sufficient to do exactly what I'm now advising you to how to think, to sort of narrow down the choice for an evaluator, because evaluator couldn't say anything but, if we are successful in doing the 6 to 8, in innovation, in changing the surface, we already then have guaranteed access to 30% of the market and demand. So those are the proposal writer's tricks and value chain tricks and so on. But that's how it works. That's how you get to the maximum scores. Now, whether it would be successful or not, whether it's going to be included really or not, that comes down later on to a lot of this. When you have these big companies trying to develop deals between themselves, or big company with a small company, even one sentence in the agreement is sufficient to essentially provide you. First, you have a letter of intent, you give it to the commission, and that's okay, or agreement that this is going to be there. But then they can easily, through the negotiation with them, they can easily withdraw. What they're doing is they're helping. Now, if they're not going to help because philanthropy, you can say, throughout our project, if we get a grant, we'll spend 200,000 or 300,000 euros using your facilities to test the equipment and to develop this or that. So we are essentially hiring you and paying you to do something ridiculously kind of less expensive for this amount of money. So you're buying their cooperation, and pretty much no one's going to refuse that, because they're not in a position to lose anything. They're not risking anything. And they can always say that either their business plans have changed after 2 years, and that they're not in any formal obligation to do that, what they expressed in the letter of intent, the situation in the market changed. They can say the quality of the results of the development were not as we expected initially, and so on and so on. They always have a way to kind of back out from it, provided that it's not the perfect solution they want. So now market development, that's the issue which I said. We are going to be developing a new market, which is when we say developing new market is how we are convincing the lead ones that we are not taking directly their market shares, but adding something different from what they're selling now, and probably involving them to a sufficient amount in profiting from it. Broader impact. If it's successfully commercialized, of course it will be, because we are going to provide proofs. Well, it's going to be having positive societal, economic, environmental, and climate impacts. Now, in order for you to provide proof for that, you need to open ongoing horizon projects. Ideally, you can now use IE for researching databases and extract linkages that connect what you're doing with these type of impacts. Now, whether this surface of the board or this delivery vehicle on batteries moving on the tracks of where the bike goes and so on are going to have those type of impacts, it's really, really difficult to prove in terms of the numbers that the Commission expects. Now, what the Commission expects is that you can measure this in, I don't know, tons of CO2 emission, hundreds or thousands in terms of employment and new jobs, and so on and so on and so on. So how to connect and do that unless you have a team, and rarely you can find. I mean, maybe I worked with some big companies. They hired me essentially as a consultant to write proposals for them. And they have big teams of proposal writers. Like, I don't know, Ellie and TT did it. Many others who are teams of 30, 40 people. But even those who had teams, they didn't have experts in calculating this. The only expert base which I found were in universities and researchers focused on those topics. And the only way, you don't hire them for writing proposal with you. You just use their results to connect those results with what actually you're doing and try to establish the reasonable link. Of course, I mean, reasonable thinking logically and consulting with them how to connect it if necessary, because you are going certainly to have at least one experience horizon, RIA, for example, or EIA evaluator or coordinator. And if it's not rational and logically connected and convincing, they're going to say, no, those are overstated impacts or something like that. So you need to provide a calculus in how you do it and a reasonable kind of way how you connected it. Team, essentially, when the funding scheme was beginning, I was curious because at the time I was the head for ecosystems in the Balkans. And many of the Balkan countries, this was ex-Yugoslavian countries, apart from Slovenia, Croatia, who joined the EU and so on. So many of them, for example, Bosnia and Montenegro and Serbia and Macedonia. And so I had the issues of consequences of war, isolation, economic crisis, authoritarian regimes, political instabilities, and so on and so on. And I said, well, you see, like when they would address me, big companies, successful ones would call me, and entrepreneurial teams and hubs and so on would call me. So the big ones were convinced that they are successful because they are still on the market, because they survived all the crises that were there. And of course, it is a miracle that they did. But does it guarantee that they're going to become a unicorn and now become extremely rich on the level of kind of dominating some EU market? Hardly. Hardly, because of the structure of employees. Most of them are not at nearly internationalized to a sufficient level that they can effectively communicate with the very diverse EU markets and different client needs, cultures, patterns, and so on and so on. So the best ones were those who would reach, for example, a huge export, for example, in Germany or France or somewhere from Bosnia in producing something and so. So I asked the guy who was at the time in charge for the agency. He didn't know that he was going to become the chief, but he was a friend. And I asked him, say, so when we're looking at these companies and we're looking at this capacity of the company and we're assessing whether the company has the potential to do it, and that's very relevant. What are we looking at? How do I say that this team of 10, 15 extremely smart and well-educated and well-networked people will do something, or compared to a 300 or 200 employees company who had survived last 20 years selling and now exporting something to Germany? Now, what are these criteria? And he said to me something which I remember even today, which is really the essence of it. He said, I'm not going to look at all whether this company survived bombing or economic crisis or something. What I'll be looking is essentially whether within the team, whether they are aware of what this project requires and whether within the team they had considered to fill out all those necessary expertise and skill sets and networks, and whether they have the right people to do it. Now, if they do, they are qualified. There is demonstrated, validated potential. If not, no. Meaning, for example, we are claiming that we're going to be better than currently best producers of electric vehicles. But at least what I want to see in the team is someone who was at the forefront in some of the reputable companies for electric vehicle producers. I want to see a background in terms of their education, technology, and so on, professional activities. I want to see an expert in that matter. Then I'm claiming that I'm going to be a successful and highly competitive market. Okay, but I need to see a person who had been winning previously in this type of arenas. So I want to see a brilliant marketing expert with a resume of he's going to be in charge for the marketing and he had previously successfully commercialized this and this and that. In terms of whatever else, I want to see this type of profiles. Now, nobody has it initially. I don't know anyone, any team, which was not created specifically for SME Instrument or Accelerator like that. I met those type of teams while I was in business schools, and they would create it just in order for us to learn to work internationally and so on and so on. But within the company, what you have usually, well, you have someone who's been there for 10, 15 years doing that. You have this, you have that. You don't have champions in their specific areas. So how do you get them on paper first? Well, you call them. You write a few emails and they see, listen, we're going for a grant of, I don't know, 2.5 million, and we're going for, it's going to be accompanied or not with the investment of 5 million, and we're going for this. Would you be okay if we include you in our team and use your references and so on, and provided that it works, you'll be at the position of, I don't know, chief technology officer or chief marketing officer or something like that. And if you get a yes, then you have a solution. And then that's how you get a high quality, high profile team that are going to sell the company's capacity to succeed. What could compensate a little bit, but that's also hard to find, is there are ecosystems which are developed. I've seen them in France and UK and Germany, pretty much around big companies who had created spin-offs in order to sort of save that those qualified employees don't go away to the competition and mostly work on projects and so on. So I've seen those ecosystems where you'd find sufficient amount of high quality people self-organized. And then you need to add maybe one expert or so, but otherwise the others know each other and had been working together and so on. Those are rare and good examples. For the large, the next step, if we pass the step one, then these are the criterions for the step two. And essentially, you don't have too many added questions. Look at this 1, 2, 3, and then the impact, these 3 essential team, and then in terms of level of risk, you have team. Now within the excellence, novelty and breakthrough of nature of innovation, that we had it. Now for challenges only, and those are top-down questions. Does the innovation address the specific objective of the challenge? And the question is very tricky because you need to, like I showed you, every word has meaning, and often those meanings are not immediately kind of intuitive. Sometimes it's counterintuitive what it means. So you have to dig through the work program and what exactly the challenge describes to see whether you fully fit in the scope of it. And if you do find, it will reduce a little bit the competition, but it does not necessarily mean that at the level of novelty, you're going to have an advantage. You're going to have less applications under a challenge than within the open scheme. But it's a top-down scheme, meaning that those who are well-versed and best in the area are going to apply for it. That's why I always say, if you're not sure, go for the open one. Timing, we had it. Technological feasibility, has a technology been safely, securely, reliably developed? Has it been validated? Essentially, you've done that already, the first step. Though here, it's worth it to state already, at the stage 2, you need to do what you've done in a short format, like altogether, we had something like, during the SME instrument, we had 10 pages max, and you take one for the initial cover page, and you take one with the predefined. You had 8 pages to fill for the step 1. Now here you had 30 pages previously. Now I don't know what the maximums here are. I need to look through the specific schemes. I think it's 30, but I've seen that, I don't know, in transition and somewhere it was 50. I think here that now from this approximately 10-page in the first application, you move to 30-page long text. So you need to go into more details in explaining these same questions. You provide more details. Intellectual property is here new. So how do you essentially protect yourself? Not only protect yourself, first, have you done your freedom to operate analysis, intellectual property analysis, and so on, so that you're not kind of stepping into someone's toes and somebody's already controlling what you think you invented and created new. And that's what many companies don't know how to do that, and many companies don't know how to profit from the intellectual property as well. It's a kind of area of expertise which requires, usually I would hire someone who's been like a lawyer or someone who's into intellectual property rights, and I want to find a business model on how I'm going to get profits from my intellectual property as one of the segments of the business profit model that I'm going to integrate into the proposal, as I'm going to sell this as a model for someone to replicate, someone to use, and so on. He's going to pay a fee or will invent ways on how to use it. But the first thing is for you to do the research in terms of whether someone's got a patent or had applied already for a patent or freedom to operate, and so on, in terms of regulation and laws on the targeted markets and so on. Impact customer demand, we'll clarify that. Market demand, clear again. This is where you essentially present the market size and the market shares you're going to be taking, whether you're creating a new market or not. Commercialization strategy, this is important. I don't think we mentioned that in the prior. The first one is a short story, how you reach the TRL where you need to be. Commercialization strategy is essentially how you're going to go further from where you are to the mass scale commercialization. You need to have a very convincing story of each step. Scale up potential, does it have a potential go to the market size that you're claiming, which will be essentially unicorn size. For grant-only support, well, can you demonstrate that you have resources which are needed for the TRL 9 and mass scale commercialization? Essentially, that's and you can play with it. You can say, after we had done this, we'll then apply to either you give letters of support or intent if you had established communication with some innovators, some investors, and then you say, well, we have letter of intents of people that they were jumping for the commercialization, or you add, apart from that we've done, we're already going to, then we're also going to apply for the next innovation component. That would be the ground first. Broader impact, successful societal, environmental, so on. I think explained it. Challenges only. Does innovation contribute to expected outcomes of the challenge and the single market? Now, in challenges only situation, again, I would refer to the reading exactly instructions and scope of the text, what it covers and what's required. And for each one of the selected outcomes and first output outcomes and then impacts, you really need to provide evidence, and you really need to clearly state, now, this is how we're going to, our project is going to achieve this listed impact in the cold text. It has to be that clear, and it has to be very convincing. And again, it has to narrow down the space for evaluators to say, oh, no, I'm not convinced. Because you're claiming you're going to, I don't know, produce that many models, and it's going to reduce CO2. You need to make it so convincing that no one can say this will not be achieved. Typically, it's just either well-versed wording and calculations, or if needed, some certification or some proofs from other projects where you call on the results of some other research project saying, well, this is the proof that this will have such an impact. Strengthening competitiveness. What we need on EU internal market, reducing strategic dependencies. Again, as I initially stated, the new topic of security within the area of our strategic autonomy compared to US and compared to China and so on. Reducing dependency would mean in the value chain that you had considered to use from the suppliers to, I mean, the whole value chain is supposed to be as much as possible cohesive and compact so that it's EU self-sufficient. So you don't need to import anything from China or US and so on. And essentially, when we're looking at the whole business model, suppliers to the follow-up. It doesn't prevent you to export to US. Or wherever. Level of risk, implementation, and so on. Now here you have a little bit more of explanations. Okay, team, in terms of their CV, motivations, and so on. This is, if I missed previously to address this issue, are there plans to acquire missing competencies? Now, you surely have. If you're planning to go to a level of a unicorn from a level of an SME, you surely need to employ a lot of people. Where from and how? And you need to answer this clearly and convincingly. Typically, what I do is I say, well, from that company, who's our strategic partner, we're going to have a lot of qualified people coming to our company because they'll be working on a new segment of the market. It's profitable for them. They'll also transfer the knowledge, and some of them will come from universities and so on, be trained. So there's a good blend of those who are experienced and well-versed in what we need. Risk level of investment. Essentially, what they're asking you is to justify why the European Innovation Council fund ought to be the source of funding, and also why the they tied up a group of investors and called them this pretty much European Innovation Council group, which does it, and it's managed by the EIB investment bank, European Investment Bank, and they do the due diligence and provide expertise and management of it. And anyone who had ever worked with EIB knows that essentially they don't do it differently than political deals with the big companies who are usually typically close to the governance. So, but the guys doing due diligence are experienced. So my first question, answer to the first one, why do you need support from, in terms of grant, from the AIDS fund? Is the only right answer that's going to be sufficiently convincing is, well, we tried with the banks and we tried with investors. And here are letters or email proof that they had answered to us that, well, it's a great thing, but it's too risky for us to go between TRL 6 and 8. And that's the truth for traditional investors and banks. They don't go there. They don't invest there. And this is why the fund was invented. So essentially, what you're providing them in your answer is what they had provided you in introduction. We've created the fund to cover the gap between 6 to 8 and so on. Well, we've tried to get investment from the bank, traditional investors, and they replied to us that this is the case. It's too risky, but if we get to 8, they might step in, and they'd like to step in, and they have a letter of intent. They will step in the mass scale commercialization and 9 and so on. So that's a kind of way to bridge this. And then ideally, you don't continue with them, you continue with investors who are actually kind of more easier to work with. But yet again, the personal communication might solve a lot of things with European Investment Bank. As I said, my experience with them is that it's a political, essentially deeply politically affected institution that would go to the relevant government within the targeted market or relevant industry leaders and ask them, do they want to see this done, whether they like to have this project funded and so on. And this is why I say, if you're working with some of the big ones as partners, then they might have already linkages with them, and that can be used for your own advantage for them to help the negotiations and to put their weight and impact there. To make a very ugly but truthful reality in front of you, just so you know, for example, in one of the last grants which was given to advance the quality of education in Serbia for supplying innovative tools, which would mean tablets and computers and smart screens, smart boards and stuff like that. The process went, instead of going through the whatever evaluation and regulatory procedures or so on, tenders, the process went through a closed group. That the chief, and I know her personally, of the A, went to the prime minister's right and left hand and prime minister directly, and they control 3 major player companies which of course they have tight correlation with political actors in the country where they operate. And they made an agreement. They said, we're going to get the first batch, and the other companies going to get the second batch, and so on. That's how in reality it worked. Opposed to what was written about, we're going to do due diligence, we're going to do that, so on. And it wasn't at all the high quality of the results which was delivered. Nobody controlled it at the end. So for many of these projects, you should be aware that there are these, typically for grant scheme, 3 batches that you get of funding, first, second, and third. Provided that the results are okay at the end, you get a third one. But you can always play on, we have achieved a certain level of quality, not the one expected, it was a little bit lower, and so on and so on. I've seen that majority of projects have not achieved what they've promised that they will achieve, but yet they receive the money. Now, the answer on how to get a winning proposal is here. If you had successfully presented the market opportunity in a convincing way, and a convincing way would be you have pre-orders from the big ones, and you have technological solution better than the existing ones. And how you can do that is by comparison, creating a table where you can clearly demonstrate so that a child would see on a table, these are characteristics of what's there on the market. Now, those are characteristics of the research and innovation projects and what they're trying to deploy, but we have this and this and this that nobody else got. So this is why we're better. And then company's potential, and I explained that as well, as actually the right mix of CVs that you can get just by asking the right people to join the team. Plus EU added value, the hidden one, which I again explained, is pitching on those policy objectives they like to see in terms of they introduce new regulation, they introduce new policy and so on. And our new product and creation of a new market is essentially driven and a consequence of this new regulation and new policy, and essentially will be driving the transformation of this market. You can say disruption, but ideally transformation of this market, so that it is now, I don't know, zero in terms of zero emission, or it will be now climate friendly in terms of mobility or whatever else. So you quote the added values and the societal impacts and so on from the policy and expectations. And that's the winning proposal. This is a graph of, if you hit those points, you're going to go to the jury. And then if you're really ready for the jury, you're going to get money. Which brings me to the next post.